You felt it, didn't you? That moment when something you weren't even sure you cared about suddenly made your heart race. Maybe it was the roar of the Azteca, that stadium shaking on June 11th like it was trying to come apart at the seams. Maybe it was 80,000 people at SoFi Stadium in Los Angeles just losing it. Maybe you caught it on your phone, half distracted, and you stopped, rewound it, watched it again. Because that's what the first 4 days of the 2026 World Cup did to this country. It didn't just start a tournament. It started something most people didn't see coming. 3 red cards. In an opening game, a 17-year-old walking onto the world's biggest stage like he already belonged there. The United States, your team, dropping 4 goals on Paraguay. A German machine dismantling a tiny island nation 7-1. And Brazil, the team everyone assumed would cruise, tied. This isn't a recap. You've already seen the highlights. This is about what those 4 days actually meant, and why this might be the most important World Cup in American history.
Hey, I'm Leo, and if this is your first time here, welcome to Footy Leo. This is the place where we don't just watch football, we try to understand it. The backstory, the context, the stuff that never makes it into the highlight reel, but completely changes how you see everything else. And right now, there is no better moment to be doing exactly this, because what happened between June 11th and June 14th isn't just a collection of opening results. It's the beginning of something this country has never experienced before. So let's go back to where it all started. June 11th, Mexico City, the Estadio Azteca, one of the most iconic venues in the history of this sport. The same ground where Pele lifted a World Cup, where Maradona scored with his hand, and then in the same game scored one of the greatest goals ever recorded, where Diego dribbled past 5 England players like they were standing still. That stadium has weight. It has memory. Every match played there carries something extra, like the walls themselves remember what history feels like. And on June 11th, 2026, it was absolutely alive. Mexico against South Africa, the opening game of the very first World Cup ever held across 3 countries, the United States, Mexico, and Canada. And from the very first minute, you could feel something was different about this tournament.
9 minutes. That's all it took. Julian Quiñones, a striker born in Colombia who chose Mexico, who carries both flags in his story, picked up the ball just inside the box and did something that silenced every question about Mexico's readiness for this moment. He scored. 9 minutes in, opening game at the Azteca. The crowd didn't just cheer, they detonated. And the thing about that goal, it wasn't only beautiful, it was a signal, a clear, unmistakable message from the host nation. We are here, we are ready, and this is our house. But then the game did something unexpected. It got messy. It got chaotic. It got interesting. 3 red cards in a single match. 3 players sent off. A record for any World Cup opening game in history. And somehow that chaos didn't kill the spectacle. It amplified it. Because here's what most people miss when they watch a game like that. The moments that happen when things fall apart, when discipline breaks, when the pressure gets too heavy, those are the moments that reveal character, real character. And then, quietly, almost as if the tournament itself was trying to whisper something, Gilberto Mora walked onto that pitch. 17 years old, the youngest player in this entire World Cup. Think about what you were doing at 17.
And then came June 12th. Los Angeles, SoFi Stadium, the kind of venue that was built for spectacle, the kind of place that looks impressive even when nothing is happening inside it. But on that afternoon, something was happening that a lot of people in this country still aren't quite sure how to process. The United States men's national team walked out in front of 80,000 people who were ready to believe. And they delivered. 4-1. Against Paraguay, dominant, decisive, and at moments genuinely beautiful. Folarin Balogun, 2 goals, a player who represents exactly what this generation of American soccer is becoming. Young, technically sharp, completely unafraid of the moment. He didn't look like a kid surviving the world stage, He looked like someone who expected to be there. But then there was that goal. You know the one. Gio Reyna, a Trivela, that curling outside of the boot strike that shouldn't work and somehow works perfectly. The kind that makes you lean forward in your seat without realizing it. The kind that turns 80,000 people into one single sound.
U.S. Captain Tim Reams said something before the tournament started that's been echoing ever since. This is a Super Bowl every single day for 5 weeks. At the time, it sounded like something a captain says before a big moment. Polished, rehearsed. But after June 12th, it didn't sound like motivation anymore. It sounded like a fact. But here's what makes these first 4 days even more interesting. While Mexico was making history at the Azteca and the US was turning SoFi Stadium into something resembling a Super Bowl, the rest of the world was also sending its own messages. And some of those messages came from places nobody expected. Germany versus Curaçao. Think about that for a second. Germany, 4 World Cup titles, one of the most complete football machines ever assembled. A country where the sport isn't just entertainment, it's practically a national language. And Curaçao? An island in the southern Caribbean with a population of roughly 150,000 people, smaller than most American cities. A nation that had never played a single World Cup game in its history. Until this week. They lost 7-1, which on paper sounds like a disaster. But that's not the story. The story is that they were there. That a tiny island most people couldn't locate on a map stood on the same pitch as Germany, under the same lights, in the same tournament. And that exists entirely because of the expanded 40-18 format FIFA introduced for this edition. 48 nations instead of 32. More stories, more David versus Goliath, more of the completely unexpected. Some people criticized the expansion. Too many teams, they said. Too diluted. But watch Curaçao walk out onto that field and try to tell me it isn't worth it. And then there's Brazil. If you know anything about football, even casually, you know what Brazil represents. 5 World Cup titles, the most in history. A country where football isn't a pastime, it's a religion. Where kids grow up knowing how to juggle a ball before they learn how to read. Brazil doesn't draw in the group stage. Brazil doesn't sweat it out against teams ranked outside the top 30. Except on June 13th, at a packed stadium in New York, they did exactly that. 1-1 against Morocco. The number doesn't even capture how tense it felt. Morocco, the team that shocked the entire world at Qatar 2022 by reaching the semifinals, showed up in New York and refused to be a walkover. They pressed, they organized, they made Brazil uncomfortable in ways the 5-time champions clearly didn't expect. And this is the thread running quietly through every single result of these first 4 days. Switzerland and Canada 1-1, Qatar and Bosnia 1-1, Korea beating Czech Republic 2-1 in a match that could have gone either way. Nobody is rolling over, nobody is here just to fill a bracket. The gap between the giants and the rest of the world, that gap that used to feel permanent, almost mathematical, is closing quietly, steadily, match by match, tournament by tournament. And this World Cup might be the clearest proof of that we've ever had. And before I get into what I think is the most important part of all of this, if you've made it this far with me, I want to invite you to subscribe to Footy Leo. We're here every single day covering the stories behind the stories of this World Cup. The stuff that doesn't make the front page but completely changes how you see the game. Hit subscribe, turn on the bell, and come back tomorrow. Because here's the thing, and I think you already sense this. If you're the kind of person who watches a video like this, you're not here just for the goals. You're here because you feel that something bigger is happening. And you want to understand it. That's exactly who this channel is for. Now, back to what matters. Because these first 4 days have quietly placed one question on the table that nobody is asking directly. Is this the World Cup where the United States becomes a real football nation? Not a host, not a participant filling a bracket, an actual contender that the rest of the world looks at and thinks they could go far. That 4-1 win against Paraguay wasn't just a result, it was a statement. And the way 80,000 people packed SoFi Stadium, the noise, the atmosphere, the pure electricity of it, told a story the scoreboard alone never could. Something is shifting in this country, and the rest of the world is starting to pay attention. Here's what I keep coming back to. The Azteca. Gilberto Mora, 17 years old, walking onto that pitch like he already belonged there. Quiñones scoring 9 minutes in, 3 red cards, and a stadium that never stopped shaking. SoFi Stadium, Balogan, Reynés Trevilla, 80,000 people who didn't know how much they cared about football until they suddenly couldn't stop. Curaçao, 150,000 people standing on the same field as Germany. Brazil, tied. Morocco refusing to disappear. None of this happened in isolation. It's all connected. It's all part of the same thing. Football has been growing in this country quietly for years. In backyards, in youth academies, in living rooms where kids watched the Premier League and started dreaming something bigger. This World Cup didn't create that. It just turned the lights on. You can debate whether the US can win this tournament, argue formations, squad depth, who deserves to start, but you can't argue with what you felt.
That thing that made you stop scrolling, that made you rewind the goal, that made you lean forward in your chair at midnight watching a group stage match like your life depended on it.
Millions of people in this country felt that for the very first time this week. That doesn't just change a tournament, that changes a country. Share this video with 5 people who haven't tuned in yet. Give them a reason to start. Follow Footy Leo and drop a comment right now. Tell me what surprised you most about these opening 4 days. And tell me what you want us to cover next. We read every single one. See you tomorrow.